Ghost Cult magazine welcomes in Randy McStine. How are you doing?
Good man, how are you?
I am great. Great to meet you. Of course, excited to talk to you about the McStine Minnemann album, the debut collaboration from two greats of all kinds of music, but generally associated with progressive music, but all kinds of stuff is represented on this album. I've gotten a chance to spend some time with the album, so I'm really excited to talk about it. Of course, we live in a insane time in the world, so it would be insensitive of me to not ask. I hope you're well. I hope your family's well. I hope Marco is well. I hope everything's okay with you guys because it's just a very unhinged time in the world.
Yes, thank you for asking, and I hope the same of you. Speaking for myself, and I guess for Marco as well, I think we're both doing fine. It's obviously you can't really describe in words what's really happening right now, especially within the last week, right? Because we had the whole pandemic shift, and now there's this whole other thing happening. So we're all kind of doing what we can, I guess. And being that you're in Brooklyn, how are you doing?
I'm hanging in there, I've been sheltering in for months, and maybe been out a handful of times since the spring. And then in terms of the other stuff, I'm just trying to, fight the good fight, keep my, make sure my friends are okay, check on them, do what I can with my outlet to support a movement of any kind.
Sure.
And, if anybody doesn't like it or they're alienated, they're on the wrong side of history and they need to come along.
Yeah,
And change doesn't happen overnight. We have a weekly news show, and I said, symbolic days of protest are important, and I think a lot of change has already happened that has surprised and impressed me. But also, this is a long-standing issue in the whole world, and we have a lot of work to do, a lot of actual work to do still.
Oh, of
And
course.
we've been fighting this fight for a long time, but I super appreciate you. I'm hanging in there.
Yeah.
You may hear some sirens, you may hear the noise of Brooklyn behind me, and if I
Yeah.
mute us, you'll still be heard, don't worry. I sometimes mute my side just for the comfort of the interviewee.
Yeah,
But it's definitely a running joke now that you hear sirens all the time in my interviews. It's pretty funny.
naturally.
But yeah, man, let's get into this. This record is wonderful and so diverse and interesting. And I've been aware of you and followed you here and there, but I'm really impressed with this album and just everything about it. So let's kind of dial it back and find out how you and Marco came together and began to collaborate and create this project.
Yeah, so we first met through somebody else's project, a guy named Dave Kersner, who I've been friends with and collaborators with going back to 2011, I believe. And Dave has a project called In Continuum, which is like a very, I don't know what you would call it, very bombastic progressive rock kind of feel. And he had me on the record and he had Marco on the record. So we, of course, did our parts remotely. Marco and I hadn't met or anything like that. And I honestly didn't expect that we would meet in the real world in the way that we did, which is that Dave then booked some gigs for the band to play live at this festival called Prague Stock, which is in Rahway, New Jersey. And then we had a couple of other one-offs. Later on, we did a thing called Cruise to the Edge as well. But this was October 2018. So suddenly, Marco and I were going to actually be playing a gig together, and which was super exciting to me. I have to admit that I was a little, I don't want to say nervous, but there was a part of me that thought, wow, geez, here's a guy who plays with like every guitar sort of master on the planet, between Guthrie and Paul Gilbert and Satriani, like Mike Keneally, just the list goes on. And I just remember going into the rehearsal studio and feeling like, I don't know if this guy's going to think I'm a complete hack or how this is going to work out, And thankfully it was not the case. And we met up later that night and had a few drinks, and he was already telling me about how he was texting Guthrie about me and all this stuff. So I thought, okay, we have a good start point. And then as we got to hang out more and more over the course of a few days, we really started talking about musical influences that we had that were well outside of the, progressive rock genre. And that's when I kind of sensed that maybe moving forward, there might be a chance for us to do something together. It wasn't like an immediate thought to me, but those conversations carried into the next year, and I asked him to play on a song of mine called Bottom Feeder Blues, which was a single that I released last April 2019. He really liked the song. It was the first time he'd heard my writing and my singing, you know, because he only had a very narrow context for me in the gig that we did just as a guitar player. So then he reciprocated. He was working on his solo album, My Sister, and he had me sing on a couple of tunes and playing guitar as well. And then just last October, I was kind of sitting here thinking, I wonder if Marco would be into trying a collaborative project together. So I just sent him a text message with like a very loose concept of, hey, you pick a few songs, I'll pick a few songs. Let's just put them out on the table and see what happens. And very quickly that the chemistry was really there and very apparent, and seemingly with no real direct conversation about what we wanted to do, the pieces of music that we both brought to the table all seemed to really work together. And it was like this really democratic thing. And now we have an album, you know, it just really just kind of went straight through, and the whole project really, you know, from conception to finish, I mean, it was just like so smooth and so fun. Even though we couldn't actually work together in the same room, it really felt natural, and yeah, just great.
Awesome. And Marco is also no slouch at guitar, by the way.
Well, great,
Yeah,
man. He plays a lot of guitar on this record. Yeah.
right. He's quite the riffer.
Yeah.
And like you, very humble, which I like hearing that. You know, if I didn't know you weren't in the same room, it doesn't sound like two supergroup type of guys. It sounds like very organic, like a band.
Awesome.
Like you had been playing together for years, and obviously you had some history together, but like it just sounds very natural, the flow of everything.
Thank you. Yeah, somebody else actually said that to me recently as well. They were really, another musician was really surprised when I said that we did it remotely. You know, he just echoed what you said. So yeah, that's good that comes across, because I think that's always the risk when you make these sort of remote albums, is if people aren't really in tune with each other and really listening to what's going on in the arrangement, it tends to really just sound like a bunch of parts were emailed to people and they kind of slap things on, and then out it goes. But we really took a lot of time to break down, like, okay, who's doing what here? What are the drums doing? How do I get out of the way of that? And, you know, make it so that everything kind of has its proper place. And major credit to our mix engineer, Forrester Savell, who did I think just an amazing job putting all the pieces together and really giving it a cohesive feel, but every track kind of has its own identity, I think.
I agree, and I know that people are going to gravitate to certain tracks, and obviously "Program" is a track you've had for a while that is now recast with the two of you. But I think like some of the you know, sort of out of the box tracks like "Fly" to
Yeah.
me is like a breath of fresh air. It's almost like a slick pop track, but it's really well written and just beautifully done. And like I started like re-listening to those tracks, sort of
Yeah.
the later album tracks, and not the obvious like listen to this busy progressive rock track, which I love all that stuff. I'm a
Right.
huge nerd, so of course that's like right in my wheelhouse for life. But I really like the different, like when you guys try to change it up and bring a little something different. I really
Yeah.
appreciated that.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, honestly, like what I was saying before about when Marco and I met and started talking about other influences, it was very clear that I also grew up a huge progressive rock fan, but probably more so than Marco. Marco isn't really like a big prog guy, and that may surprise people because of his associations, but it just happens to be that, you know, you find yourself as a musician sometimes being almost typecast in a way based on just you know, partnerships that you have, or just the fact that he's such a virtuoso that I think people expect that purely from him, and that he must just love playing the most complex music all the time. And I was really delighted to find that we were connecting on things like Public Image Limited and Gary Newman's Two-Way Army, and he's a huge fan of the Knack, funny enough, which is something that when we started working on this record, he asked me if I was a fan, and I said, honestly, man, I only know the hit. And he's like, man, what you're writing reminds me of the Knack, and I love the Knack. And I was like, wow, cool. And XTC, just like progressive music, not progressive rock, in a way. And so there's a lot of, to me, there's like a sort of post-punk engine in this whole record that kind of, there's a kind of a punk energy that runs through the whole thing. There's a certain rawness to it, but it's also, obviously it's very precise from a playing point of view, and we're pulling in progressive influences, but we didn't set out to make a progressive rock album in any shape or form. I think it's just, we're naturally informed by these things, the way we play, and those textures are there, but it's, I think that's why maybe it feels a little bit outside of that.
Indeed. And I love you mentioned Gary Newman and
Yeah.
XTC, and I hear a lot of like post-punk new wave stuff there, and I love, and vocally I totally feel that XTC thing, because you do a wonderful job. Your vocal range and some of your choices, and even a little harmonies and things that you do,
Yeah.
I think doubling yourself is very much in that, like, sort of 80s pop sensibility that I dig a lot. Like I know all the heavy metal and progressive rock guys are all like, I'm too good for that pop stuff, but like stuff, 80s was like everybody could play their instruments, everybody could sing, whether you had a one-hit wonder or no hits.
Yeah.
And it's not like today where everything is, watered down and processed. So like, yeah, man, I totally feel those influences. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, look, till the day I'm not here, will always say that like the band King's X is one of my lifelong influences. It's like I heard King's X a lot more than the Beatles in my early childhood. Like, and when you consider that, I was born in 1988, and my dad was a huge King's X fan and introduced me to so much music. But when I was really young, I would hear, Gretchen Goes to Nebraska and all these records just on repeat. And I think it to this day has really shaped almost everything that I do in some way, because of the fact that they're also one of those bands that they're kind of, to me, they're like not of their time. If you look at what else was going on in popular music, the elements that they were blending together, seem to have no place in things like Warrant or whatever. And that's not to like bag on what was going on. It's just there's like this real artful thoughtfulness to the whole thing, and this idea that you could take like really heavy, almost like Sabbath riffs and these like Beatles harmonies and like Sly and the Family Stone kind of funk and kind of blend it all together, was a huge impact on me, and I'm honored to say that those guys are dear friends of mine and actually big time supporters of my work. And that's a very strong influence on a lot of my vocal and guitar choices on this record, especially a song like Activate, which is straight up kind of trio, Police, King's X, Rush kind of vibe.
Right on. Yeah, and I totally could, now that you mentioned that, I totally get the Ty Tabor thing.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I mean, he's a genius, and you have a lot of those qualities too. And another guy that's like supremely humble. I don't know why he shouldn't be, but he is mega humble. And
Yeah.
I'm a massive King's X fan, so that's
Awesome.
amazing. How did you, and like you said, you brought in some songs, Marco brought in some songs. Did you sort of, after you brought in the skeleton of a song, did you guys sort of have dibs on what parts you would bring in, whether it was other instrumentation, other parts, or, how did you work that out?
I would say the majority of this record, we were individually written compositions, and we both, because we're multi-instrumentalists, because we make our own solo records, our demos were pretty much full blown, like just ready to go. But the thing is that there was a real trust between us and a real understanding of just kind of putting it there and hands off and kind of saying like, well, do what you want. with this, change the drum pattern, add a good, me as a guitar player to Marco, knowing that he is a really good guitar player and loves to play. It was like, if anytime you see fit, put a guitar part in, put a keyboard part in, arrangement ideas. So that kept it really fun and fresh, and almost like, receiving a Christmas present every time an email would come in with like a new song revision or something. And so that's kind of the way we did it. I would say a lot of what I brought to the table sort of had a concept based around trio sort of arrangement. I really wanted this very bass centric sound with like a really driving kind of pick, P bass kind of thing. And for the guitars to be really heavy, but I was listening to a lot of 70s rock records when I was tracking guitars, and I was struck by how sparse things used to be in production. Just going back to like Van Halen 1, you're not really hearing much more than a live band playing those songs. It's like you've got Eddie's guitar in one speaker and Michael Anthony's bass over here, and it's like the heaviest thing ever, but it's pre-digital, so it's not this thing where it's just walls and walls of guitars and we got to double and triple track everything. A lot of what I did was coming from a place of minimalism, and let's bring it back to like a kind of an analog approach. And then when it comes to layering things, it'll be that much bigger sounding when we add a second guitar or a second vocal or that kind of thing. So that was kind of my framework. And then Marco is in some ways the opposite. He can really fill out the picture and just go for it and give you just so many really cool ideas that I found myself, when he would send me a song, really having to sit with it for a while to say like, okay, what's going on here? Because, there's so many different things I could focus on. So I had to kind of, peel it apart and find a way to arrange things so that everything can kind of breathe. And that was kind of a thing that for him, once he saw what I was doing with his songs and how I was embellishing them, rearranging, changing melodies, I think that's when he gained a real trust in my abilities, and that he could take a step back and trust that I would, if I was going to add or subtract anything to his songs, that it would in the end be something that we're both really proud of, and not territorial, if that makes sense.
No, totally. And I was going to ask if you took that same approach with lyrics, because I love some of the storytelling on the album too. I don't want to discount. Like I said, I definitely love your voice, and I love some of these lyrical choices are also fun.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say lyrically, the songs are mostly either myself or him for his tunes. The one exception is kind of a weird story, which is this ballad on the record called The Closer, which is a song that before we even started this project, he had sent me a couple of songs for his upcoming solo record at the time. And he had a song that he worked on with Alex Lifeson, and he wasn't going to, at the time, really do anything with it. So I just kind of had it, and he sent it to me like, hey, if anything inspires you with this, do something with it. And when Neil Peart died, I went through this like super heavy, obviously emotional phase, but just going through the whole Rush catalog, like from start to finish, it was a whole journey, right? But that coincided with the time that I was working on the record again. And I spent a lot of time just thinking about Neil, thinking about those guys, and I've never met any of them, but they've had such a huge impact on me, just like anybody. And this like little 5-second or so clip from that song with Alex kind of popped into my head, and I started thinking about it, and I wrote a song around like 2 lines in that song, and sat down at the piano and tried to get something. So and then I sent it to Marco, and he was really touched by it. You know, he had no idea that I would go back to this piece that he sent me like a year ago and actually present it in this way. So he likes to say it's the first time that he's ever had a co-write collaboration where he's not even on the track. There's no drums. It's all just piano and my guitars and vocals. But so lyrically speaking, that song is like 90% my lyrics, but inspired by this 10% slice, which was the spark to get the whole thing going. So, you know, we're already working on new material now, for whatever comes next, and we're starting to shake up our process a bit, you know, by starting with more raw materials. Like I'll just send him a riff with no context, and then he can take it and run with it and add stuff. So, you know, I'm into process and just trying different ways of, you know, finding sounds and song arrangements, stuff like that. So yeah, it's all about process for me.
That's killer. I'm excited that you guys are already working on the next thing. That's great.
Yeah.
But very excited for people to hear this thing. Obviously, a weird time in the world to be promoting a record, but I feel like you guys have done a very nice job with the 2 singles and the videos. The vertical video I really loved. I thought that was very fun and inventive, especially because social media is kind of everything now.
Yeah.
Fortunately or unfortunately, people watch a lot of stuff on their phones, so you have to tailor some of the content to them. But I thought that video was great. Do you guys have anything else planned in the way of any more singles or video clips coming up?
Yeah, actually, just 2 days ago, we put up a new full-length video for a song called "Your Offenses," which is our second single. So that's you can find that on YouTube and everywhere now. And that video is just a straight-up performance video, trying to display as much of the elements in the song as possible in video form. And you know, I'm singing in front of these records that are behind me and that kind of thing. You know, it's a homemade thing because that's what we have to do. But yeah, I really like that song quite a bit, and I'm already seeing that people kind of responding to it. It has a very classic feel, you know, kind of that early Police kind of energy, with some really cool riffs and, you know, a lot of playing, but in a very condensed amount of time, which is kind of the theme of this record, you know, which is like very precise, short songs. And we wanted to make a classic length record and not have it just get kind of bloated.
I dig it. Just for like a last question, obviously you've been making a lot of music and you have your record collection behind you, but what else are you doing, having been through this quarantine lockdown? What else are you doing to just keep your spirits up? Hobbies, anything in particular to just keep yourself sharp?
Trying to get more serious again about physical fitness and, you know, just general health stuff. But honestly, just really a lot of podcasts, a lot of music, a lot of music for sure. And yeah, just really, I don't know, trying to keep my head in the game, because this is obviously just such a weird time. And even like a month in to the lockdown, it really took that long for me. One night I was just going to bed and I realized every musician that I know is just stuck at home. Nobody's on tour. There's nothing going on. And for some people, this is like a nice break from I don't want to say nice, but you know what I mean? It's a break from the routine that maybe was overdue for people who are just like constantly on the road or whatever. It's a time to recharge. And some people, I get the impression, have just completely sort of checked out. And it's just like, yep, we're just going to, you know, watch TV and whatever, eat ice cream and whatever you got to do, I guess. But I've really tried to not slip into being too complacent, because I do see so much opportunity for growth right now. And if we can sort of find a way to cope with what's going on and just get through it, I mean, times of turmoil like this, I mean, you know, the best positive spin I could put on it is if you can come out of this just kind of feeling at an individual level like some sense of growth or progression. And so I guess in that way I'm just trying to do what I can to stay positive, you know, because the outlook is obviously pretty grim if you go down that path for too long. And I really think unplugging from things like social media is super important. You know, it's just too toxic to really stay in that headspace for too long. So that's it, man. I'm really just trying to maintain. I do want to find more hobbies though. I'm through doing these videos actually. I'm finding that because I'm doing all the video editing, that it's a skill that I'm getting better at and more interested creatively. So you know, I'm almost at a point where I just want to start making some weird experimental films or something, just for the hell of it, and weird soundtracks or something. I mean, it's hard for me to shut off the creative side and just do something kind of mindless. So I'm trying to read more books versus being on a screen, trying to play more guitar and just keep up my chops and move things forward.
All right, man. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you in general for sharing your story here today with me. Super pumped about this McStine Minnemann album, and can't wait for the next one. There's already another one in the pipeline, apparently, so that's amazing.
Thanks, man. It's great to talk to you.
Thanks.